My in-laws ordered me to recite vows in their native language, or call off the wedding. My husband's family demanded I recite my vows in their native language, or leave. I whispered to myself, the words clawing at my throat as I stood in the dim-lit foyer of the sprawling Nguyen family estate. The ultimatum had come just hours ago, delivered by my mother-in-law, Lynn, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her voice, soft but unyielding, echoed in my memory. If you cannot honor our traditions, Emily, you have no place here. The air in the house felt heavy, thick with the scent of jasmine incense and the weight of expectation. My wedding to James was tomorrow, and now this. I'd met James 3 years ago at a coffee shop in Seattle, his easy laugh and quiet confidence pulling me in. He was Vietnamese American, born to parents who'd fled Saigon in '75, and though he'd warned me his family was traditional, I hadn't expected this. The rehearsal dinner was meant to be a celebration, but it had unraveled into a quiet ambush. Lynn had waited until the toasts were done, the clink of glasses fading, to lean across the table and issue her demand. The rest of the family, James's father, Duke, his aunts, his cousins, watched in silence, their faces unreadable. James, seated beside me, had frozen, his hand tightening around his wine glass but saying nothing. I wanted to scream, to demand why this hadn't come up before, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I nodded, my face burning, and excused myself to the bathroom. Where I'd been hiding for the last 10 minutes, the mirror showed a stranger, pale, wide-eyed, my auburn hair slipping from its careful updo. I wasn't fluent in Vietnamese. I'd learned a few phrases, enough to greet Lynn politely or thank Duke for dinner. But reciting vows, it was impossible. They knew it. This wasn't about tradition. It was a test, one I was meant to fail. James found me there, his knock tentative. You okay?" His voice was low, strained, like he was afraid of the answer. I opened the door, meeting his dark eyes, searching for the man who'd promised to stand by me. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked away, rubbing the back of his neck. I thought they'd come around. I wanted to believe him, but doubt coiled in my chest. His silence at the table had felt like betrayal, a crack in the foundation we'd built. Still, I couldn't walk away, not yet. This was the man I loved, the life I'd chosen. I took a breath, forcing my voice steady. "I'll try," I said, though I didn't know how. "I'll learn the vows." His relief was palpable, but it didn't reach me. As we rejoined the family, Lynn's gaze lingered, sharp and assessing. I smiled tightly, my hands clasped to hide their trembling. In the quiet of my mind, a spark flickered. Not surrender, but defiance. They wanted me to prove myself? Fine, I'd do it my way. The morning of the wedding dawned gray, Seattle's sky heavy with the threat of rain. I stood in a small guest room at the Nguyen estate. A borrowed Vietnamese phrasebook clutched in my hands, its pages creased from hours of frantic study. My reflection in the vanity mirror showed dark circles under my eyes, the result of a sleepless night spent wrestling with unfamiliar syllables. The vows, handwritten on a slip of paper, mocked me from the table. I'd managed to memorize half, but my pronunciation was clumsy, each word a stumble. Lynn's ultimatum hung over me like a blade, and James's silence from the night before still stung, a bruise I couldn't ignore. Downstairs, the house buzzed with preparations, cousins arranging flowers, aunts barking orders in rapid Vietnamese. I felt like an intruder, my presence tolerated but not welcomed. James had left early for the groom's preparations, leaving me to face the day alone. I'd hoped for a moment with him, a chance to bridge the gap widening between us. But he'd only sent a text. "You've got this. I love you." The words felt hollow, a bandage on a wound too deep to name. I was practicing a particularly tricky phrase when Lynn entered without knocking. Her silk dye shimmered, her posture regal. "Emily," she said, her tone clipped. The guests will expect perfection. You understand the importance of this, yes? Her eyes flicked to the phrase book, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. I nodded, my throat tight, but inside, something shifted. Her condescension wasn't just a challenge, it was a dare. I wouldn't let her see me crumble. The hours blurred, hair, makeup, the weight of my white dress pinning me in place. I kept the phrase book hidden, stealing glances between stylist visits. By noon, a new fear had taken root. What if this wasn't just about the vows? Lynn's demand felt like a symptom of something larger, a rejection of me as a whole. I pushed the thought down, focusing on the task. I could do this. I had to. Then came the twist. As I stepped into the hallway, ready to head to the ceremony, I overheard Lynn speaking to Duke in the next room, their voices low but clear. If she fails, we'll have grounds to push James towards someone better, Lynn said. He deserves a wife who understands our ways. Duke's murmur of agreement hit me like a slap. This wasn't a test of tradition. It was a calculated move to break us apart. My hands shook, but not from fear. Anger surged, hot and clarifying. They thought they could control James, control me. They were wrong. I slipped back into the guest room, my pulse racing. I wouldn't confront them yet, but the knowledge changed everything. I tore through the vows again, my voice steadier now, fueled by a resolve I hadn't felt before. I wasn't just fighting for James, I was fighting for myself. As I headed downstairs, the first raindrops pattered against the windows, and a distant cousin rushed in, breathless. The officiant's car broke down, she said. He's stuck an hour away. The room erupted in chaos, but I stood still, my mind sharp. This was my chance, not to bend, but to break through. The Nguyen Estate's grand hall was a sea of murmurs, guests shifting restlessly as Vandin lashed the tall windows. The officiant's absence had thrown the wedding into disarray, and I stood at the edge of the chaos, my white dress heavy with damp air. Lynn was in the center of the room, her voice sharp as she directed cousins to call backup officiants, her composure fraying. James, finally back from the groom's quarters, caught my eye from across the hall. His face was tight with worry, but he didn't approach. I didn't need him to. The overheard conversation between Lynn and Duke burned in my mind, fueling a clarity I hadn't known I possessed. I stepped forward, my voice cutting through the noise. I can lead the ceremony until the officiant arrives. The room stilled, heads turning. Lynn's eyes narrowed. But I held her gaze, my heart pounding. I wasn't fluent in Vietnamese, but I'd memorized the vows, and I knew the structure of the ceremony from weeks of planning. More than that, I knew this was my moment to seize control. We can start with the vows, I said, my tone steady. James and I will go first. A ripple of surprise passed through the guests. James hesitated, then nodded. Moving to my side, Lynn opened her mouth to protest, but Duke placed a hand on her arm, his expression unreadable. I took it as permission. We moved to the altar, a low table adorned with orchids and candles, the crowd forming a loose circle around us. My hands trembled as I faced James, but my voice didn't waver. I began the vows in Vietnamese, each word deliberate, my accent rough but clear. The guests leaned in, some nodding, others whispering. James followed, his own vows halting but earnest, his eyes locked on mine. Halfway through, Lynn interrupted, her voice cold. This is not proper. The officiant must lead. The room tensed, but I didn't flinch. We're honoring your tradition, I said, switching to English, my words carrying to every corner. But we're also building our own. A few guests murmured approval, and Lynn's face tightened. I saw it then, the crack in her control. She hadn't expected me to fight back. The twist deepened as James spoke, his voice low but firm. Mom, enough. Emily's doing this for us, not you. The room gasped. Lynn's eyes widened, and Duke shifted uncomfortably. James had never defied his mother publicly, and the weight of his words hung heavy. I felt a surge of pride, but also fear. This was no longer just my battle. The guests were watching, judging, and the family's carefully curated image was unraveling. We finished the vows, the crowd clapping tentatively, but the tension didn't break. As we stepped back, a cousin rushed in, soaked from the rain. "The officiant's here," she announced. The room exhaled, but I knew the real storm was coming. I caught Lynn's eye, her expression a mix of fury and calculation. She'd lost this round, but she wasn't done. And neither was I. As the officiant took over, I whispered to James, "We need to talk, now." He nodded, and we slipped into a side room, the crowd's eyes burning into our backs. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. In the cramped side room, the hum of the wedding faded behind the closed door. James faced me, his jaw tight, the weight of his public defiance still lingering in his eyes. Rain drummed against the window, a steady pulse matching my racing heart. "What did you hear?" he asked, his voice low, as if afraid of the answer. I didn't hesitate. "Your parents want me gone," I said, the words sharp. "They think I'm not good enough for you, and this vow thing was their way to prove it." His face crumpled, not with surprise, but with guilt. He'd known, maybe not the details, but enough. "I should have stopped them sooner," he admitted, his hands clenching. "I thought I could keep the peace, but I was wrong." His honesty disarmed me, but it wasn't enough. I needed more than regret. I needed him to choose us. "Then choose," I said, my voice steady. "Me or them." He didn't answer right away, and the silence cut deeper than any words could. We returned to the ceremony, the officiant now leading, his voice a drone against the storm outside. I stood beside James, smiling for the guests, but my mind was elsewhere. Lynn's gaze bored into me from the front row, her composure restored but her eyes cold. The ceremony ended, rings exchanged, applause rising, but the victory felt hollow. As we moved to the reception, I made a decision. I wouldn't let Lynn's manipulation define our marriage. At the reception, held in the estate's banquet hall, I saw my chance. The toasts began, glasses raised, and when it was my turn, I stood, my hands steady. "I want to thank the Nguyen family for welcoming me," I said, my voice clear, carrying over the crowd, "and for teaching me what it means to fight for love." I paused, meeting Lynn's eyes. "I learned the vows in Vietnamese not to prove myself to you, but to show James and myself what I'm capable of. This marriage isn't yours to control, it's ours." The room went silent, then erupted in applause, some guests cheering, others whispering. Lynn's face was a mask, but Duke's nod was subtle, almost approving. James squeezed my hand, his grip firm, a silent promise. Later, as we danced, he whispered, "I choose you, M, always." The words weren't a cure, but they were a start. The fallout came quietly. Lynn and Duke left early, their absence noted by the guests. Cousins approached me, some apologetic, others admiring. The family's influence wouldn't vanish, but I'd cracked its foundation. Days later, James and I moved to a new apartment, a fresh start away from the estate's shadow. We'd face challenges, cultural gaps, family tensions, but we'd face them together. As we unpacked, I found the crumpled vow paper in my bag. I smiled, tucking it away. "I'm not their pawn," I said aloud. "The words a vow of my own, and I never will be."